Hello, CTK. We are excited to be able to bring to you a series of meditations on this Holy Week in the 7 last sayings of Jesus. My name is Omar Ortiz, and I am the director of the Church Planning Center Ministry of the church. And I'm excited to be able to do day 1, the first saying of Jesus, which is found in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 23, verse 34. Let me read these verses to you. And when they came to the place that is called the Skull, there they crucified him and the criminals, one on his right and one on his left. And Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they do." And they cast lots to divide his garments, and the people stood by watching, but the rulers scoffed at him, saying, "He saved others, let him save himself, if he is Christ, the Son of God, the chosen one." The soldiers also mocked him, coming up and offering him sour wine and saying, "If you are King of Jews, save yourself." There was also an inscription over him, "This is the King of the Jews." This passage, this scene, the moments leading up to this particular scene are really kind of a whirlwind for Jesus. If you think of it, it's just the afternoon before that he was getting ready to celebrate the Passover meal with his disciples. It is at that meal that the wheels of betrayal begin to go into motion as Judas leaves to betray Jesus. After the meal, Jesus goes into the Garden of Gethsemane with the remaining 11 disciples. And it's there that Jesus asks them, "Please stay up, pray with me." But the wine and the meal are working in the disciples, making them groggy and sleepy, and they find themselves asleep, and Jesus finds himself all alone praying. As Jesus comes back and begins to talk to the disciples, they begin to hear the noise of the crowd coming to arrest Jesus, and it is with that fateful kiss that Judas sets the wheels of the betrayal finally in full motion, and Jesus is arrested. In the middle of the night, Jesus is in the midst of the crowd, and Peter denies him 3 times. And Luke chapter 22 tells us that it is at that moment that Jesus and Peter lock eyes with each other. And Jesus feels the weight probably of his loneliness in that moment. By the next morning, between 6 and 8, Jesus is being sent back and forth between Pilate and Herod, these 2 politicians trying to figure out who it is that's going to be responsible for crucifying Jesus. By 8 a.m., he has been whipped, he has been mocked, he has had a robe put on him, and he is being sent off, carrying the cross. The weight is so burdensome that at one point, another individual, Simon of Cyrene, is brought to carry the cross to Golgotha, the place of the skull. And by 9 a.m., Jesus is on the cross. And it is at the beginning of his cross as this noise and betrayal and mockery, and people are there and they're playing games with his clothes. All of this is going on, and what Jesus says is, "Father, forgive them. They do not know what they are doing." We hear Jesus's words here, and we see the context in which they're in, and we recognize that this was not just some small offense. Jesus was betrayed, he was denied, he suffered great injustice, and in the midst of all of that, he does that in order to forgive. See, this first word of the cross is a word about forgiveness. It is a word reminding us that at the cross, what Jesus is doing is he is forgiving us of our sins. The amazing thing about this is that Jesus is not one of those teachers that will say, "Do what I say, but don't do what I do." Jesus actually taught several times on the importance of forgiveness. One such story is in a parable that Jesus tells. We find the parable in Matthew 18. It's commonly referred to as the parable of the unmerciful servant or the unforgiving servant. And the parable is this servant owes his master a great sum of money, so much money that he has no hope of ever being able to pay it back. And he calls out on the pleads for the mercy of his master, and the master forgives him, wipes the debt clean. No sooner is this now forgiven individual sent out that he comes across somebody who owes him a very small amount of money. And this individual does the same thing. I can't pay you right now. Please be patient with me. Forgive me. And the unmerciful servant says no and sends this person to jail. The master catches wind of what happens, and Jesus says that as a result, the unmerciful servant is sent to prison. And the point of the parable is that those who have experienced forgiveness are to be those who forgive others. Jesus makes the same point in Mark chapter 11 when he says this, as your Father has forgiven you, so you also need to forgive other people. At the heart of the Easter story is the message that we have been forgiven, that we have experienced the forgiveness that Jesus Christ has for us. And that forgiveness then is what allows us to be able to forgive other people. This is why in Luke chapter 6, Jesus can say to us that we are to pray for those who persecute us, that we are to bless those who slander us. And that's exactly what we see Jesus doing on the cross. You see, Jesus doesn't just tell us what to do. Jesus models for us how we should live. Jesus lives the life that we're not capable of living on our own. He fulfills all righteousness. And so as a result, we're not just given this picture of Jesus saying, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing, to inspire us. Oh, isn't he great? Isn't he lovely? It's given to us as a model for how we are to forgive other people. In his book, Beautiful Resistance, John Tyson, a pastor in New York City, writes this about forgiveness. Our enemies hurt us. Our enemies abuse us. Our enemies do violence to us. This can cause horrific trauma and require deep healing, boundaries, and grief. Jesus, however, experienced all the suffering and still insisted on love. He extended costly forgiveness to those who crucified him. He goes on to tell a really powerful story, a recent story, of just how this kind of forgiveness can work, even in the most traumatic of circumstances. In the trial of Dylan Ruth, the white supremacist who killed brothers and sisters at the Mother Emanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Charleston, South Carolina. During the convicting phase of the trial, one of the daughters of the victim, Nadine Collier, the daughter of the murdered victim, Ethel Lance, said these words, "You took something very precious from me. I will never talk to her again. I will never hold her again, but I forgive you and have mercy on your soul." How is it possible for us to extend that kind of forgiveness? It's only possible because we have been forgiven. It is only possible because we have been forgiven by Jesus, who cried out on the cross, "Father, forgive them. They don't know what they are doing." Forgiveness does not necessarily mean reconciliation. We recognize that sometimes the posture of our hearts has to be a posture of willingness to forgive, even if the person hasn't necessarily come to us and asked for forgiveness and hasn't repented to us. But even in those moments, we can pray and ask that the Lord would change our hearts so that we would pray for them, that the Lord would do his work in their lives. We give up the right to get even. Romans 12 says that God will avenge. And so we rest on the fact that there's a just God who punished our sin on the cross. As Jesus was there crying for forgiveness, he was accomplishing our forgiveness. And it is from there that we are able, with Jesus, to hear those words, "Father, forgive them," and actually pray prayers and say words like Nadine said to Dylan Roof. So this Holy Week, as we move into the remaining lessons from the 7 sayings of Jesus, Now, I want to encourage you as you reflect, as you think, as you pray, as you consider the questions that we've provided for you, that the example of Christ on the cross, as we prepare ourselves to celebrate this Easter Sunday, would inspire us, not just to find out more information about Jesus, but to follow him in this particular day, to follow him in the act of forgiveness.